Welcome, everyone. It's really, really great to see such a big turnout tonight. My name is Tammy Vandenberg, and I co-own this venue with my brother Jeff. And I was just talking with folks out back. We're about to have our 10-year anniversary this year, which is exciting. And one of the reasons we opened this bar was, of course, music and DJs and dancing, but also to do things like this and to get people together and talk about what we want to see in our community. And so this is our very first community or educational event we've had in 16 months. I can't tell you how amazing it feels to be back. We've had a handful of shows and dance parties. I was just mentioning, it was as if people hadn't danced in well over a year and really, really enjoyed themselves. That was fun. Anyway. But the reason we're here tonight is to decriminalize nature. And I couldn't be more excited to be working with folks on this. I'm not part of the leadership, I'm just supporting. I've been a long time drug policy reformer, like folks here. Mike and I have been to countless Drug Policy Alliance conferences and harm reduction conferences, and worked on everything from legal syringe exchange to Narcan and naloxone distribution to working with the city to allow our Red Project mobile unit to operate anywhere in the city. I've worked with some of you on decriminalizing cannabis all the way back in 2012, and then I was part of the state group to legalize cannabis in 2018. So we've seen incredible progress on changing how we think about drugs and moving drugs from the criminal justice system where they don't belong into the health system. And thank you, yes. So I just wanna, I have 1 minute, so I probably already used it. Just wrapping up, thank you for coming. I wanna thank Chad, Mary, Kurt, and everyone that has really spearheaded this. This is not easy work. Drugs still carry a massive stigma of every kind, and people are really afraid to talk about this stuff, to be honest about this stuff, to talk about their use, and for really good reason, right? But there's power in numbers, and the more of us that come out, the more of us that are honest about our use, the more we take on that stigma, right? And the safer it is for everybody, and the better chance we have to change these terrible, unfair, draconian policies. So, lastly, I just read Carl Hart's second book. Anybody read that?
Yeah.
Drug Use for Grown-Ups. It's absolutely fantastic. Dr. Carl Hart's been a long time hero of mine. We brought him to Grand Rapids a few years back, but he talks about, in the Declaration of Independence, we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for me, that's what this is all about, right? This is about liberty. This is about making our own choices about what we put in our body. And this is about pursuit of happiness, right? You're going to hear a lot about that from the doctors tonight and from others, but I firmly, strongly believe that we have a right to pursue our own happiness in the way that we see fit if we are not harming anyone else. And so that is why I'm here, and that is why we are happy to host you all and contribute to this really fantastic cause. Please consider volunteering, please consider contributing. I've run these types of campaigns, and it is extremely difficult, very time-consuming, and costs an enormous amount of money. So please, if you like what you hear tonight, if you feel like this is something that is important, please step up, because this only happens when enough people step up and take part and fight for change. So thank you again.
Thanks, Tammy. Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Mary Reed Kelly, and I'm a co-founder and board member of Decriminalize Nature at Grand Rapids. We want to start with by acknowledging the land we're on and the people that came before us. As inhabitants of the unceded ancestral lands of the first people of Michigan, we honor the Anishinaabe, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Bodewadme people, also known as the people of the Three Fires, past, present, and future. We also recognize with gratitude the land herself upon which we now live and work. We also want to thank our sponsors, Pyramid Scheme, the venue, as Tammy said, she's co-owner, and the West Michigan Cannabis Guild, of which Tammy is a co-founder also. Today's event is free, and we thank you so much for coming. We are taking donations if you feel inclined at the table over here. And those funds will be used to continue educating the community about the benefits of entheogenic plants and fungi with events like these and whatever other ideas we may come up with. So we appreciate your consideration of that. Last thing I'm going to say is read a statement from Larry Norris, who is the co-founder and co-chair of Decriminalize Nature National out of San Francisco Bay Area. Larry's originally from Michigan and went to the University of Michigan, but has finished his doctoral dissertation at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and he teaches graduate school classes on entheogenic education. So he's written, he can't be here, obviously, but he's written this statement for me to read. Hello, Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's been an honor and a pleasure working with the Decriminalize Nature Grand Rapids team over the last year, and we're excited to see so much progress happening in Michigan. You're all on the leading edge of change for the people, for the grassroots, for our ancestors, and for the sacred. And we thank you for your continued hard work. By decriminalizing entheogenic plants and fungi and encouraging a grow, gather, gift model and community-based practice, you're ensuring equitable access to all people to engage in their unalienable right to have their own relationship with nature. In a time when big pharma and venture capital are looking to control, limit, monopolize, and patent our access to ancestral sacred plants and fungi, it's critical now more than ever to take action and advocate for our plant and fungi allies. The Decrim Nature National Board wishes you well and great success in proposing the resolution to decriminalize nature in Grand Rapids, and that you'll be joining 7 cities across the US that have already decriminalized entheogens. Now Grand Rapids gets to help show the rest of the country how it's done the right way for the people. Thank you again to the Decrim Nature Grand Rapids team and to Grand Rapids City Commissioner Kurt Reppard, who's going to speak next, who is our political advisor. And Larry ends with, "Go Team Nature." So, Kurt Reppard.
Thank you, Mary. First, I do thank you, Tammy and Jeff, for allowing us to use this space. I am so grateful for the leadership team of Decriminalize Nature GR, to Mary, to Chad, to Luke, and to Andrea. I remember when Chad and I had lunch together at Terra about a little over a year ago to begin exploring what this would look like. And instantly, I knew these are people that I can work with. And in fact, the meetings that we've had, and we've met almost weekly, I can't make it every time, but have been a wonderful source of friendship for me during the pandemic, when that was a very, very challenging time. We would meet together. We would always center connecting with each other personally before we got down to business. And for me, that was a big gift during the pandemic. So thank you to all of those folks. I support this work for a lot of reasons. I have about 3 roads that got me to the place of wanting to see this happen in Grand Rapids. I'll just talk about a couple of them. The first is that if we're gonna truly address these kind of sticky societal problems of addiction and declining mental health and the pressure that everybody's experiencing, we've got to look at data and science, and we've got to stop trying to address it in the same way. We've got to stop addressing it with policing strategies. We've got to stop addressing it with this kind of shame strategy, just say no strategy. All that stuff doesn't work. We haven't made much progress, and so for me, we've got to look at the data and the research, and I believe that that's prevalent with this. Secondly, I think that it dovetails quite nicely with our national conversation about public safety. And decriminalizing things that are not harming anyone ought to be the first thing that we take away from law enforcement and say, you know what, we've been asking you to do that. you no longer have to go to those places where you don't have the training and the expertise, and it's always uncomfortable. So to me, it fits nicely with this call nationally to shift addressing these rooted problems in our community away from police-based strategies and toward strategies that are harm reduction, risk reduction, supporting things like housing first and all those kinds of things. So I think that that's one of the second roads that got me here. But the third one is really that I've met so many people, many of whom are in this room, who have personally been healed by these medicines. And so the research is there. It's the right thing to do from a budgetary standpoint and an emphasis as a city. But for me, I want to be known as somebody who promotes healing and who promotes people's well-being, and for people to be able to thrive, especially as this world continues to throw more and more at us. And so I'm thankful for the people who've shared their stories with me, and it's the main reason that motivates me to kind of bring this forth. And I'll just say this, it's my hope that we'll get a resolution in front of the City Commission for the vote this fall. We've got a path forward. If you find me, I'll tell you a bit more about what I think that path looks like. But I'm hoping that we can vote on this, we can pass it this fall, and then people in this city will have access, and therapists in this city and practitioners in this city will have access to leveraging these sacred medicines for the healing of our city. Thank you all. Well, I should introduce, this is Michael, and I've gotten to know him through this. We never only met recently. We see each other on Zoom. It's so great to finally be able to shake hands and hug these people that we've done such good work together. So Michael's going to talk about the statewide movement.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tammy, Jeff, for hosting us. Thank you, Mary and Chad, for having us with Decrim Nature Michigan here. I was part of the Ann Arbor team that passed last September our own Decrim Nature resolution, which was immediately adopted by the county prosecutor, Ellie Savitt, who said, I love this. I'm going to make this non-prosecutable county-wide. So all of Washtenaw County right now, you cannot be prosecuted for these substances, and that's amazing. I actually just got off a call with Larry, which is why I was running a little late getting here. Talking about, the failures of the drug war and why it's so important to decrim nature right now. And I think Kurt really hit it on the head when he's talking about ways to move away from police and criminal justice, with not only because they're low-risk substances, but because they can heal, and our country is suffering. And so that's why we started the statewide movement, and we have some champions in the state legislature that are willing to introduce. We have some language that's already been prepared by us and approved by the state, the Bureau of Legislative Services, so the language is ready. So when we go back into regular congressional session this September, we're hoping to introduce a statewide bill that would decrim entheogens across the entire state and be the first state in the country to do that. We have a table over here. I'd love to talk more about the statewide movement, but we can't do this without you. So please take time, donate to Decrim Nature Grand Rapids, stop by our tables, talk to us, talk about why this is important. I want to hear your stories. I want to share mine. Thank you.
Okay, next up is Matthew and Mariela.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Cockrum. It is so good to be here with you tonight. I am a minister, a chaplain, a yoga instructor, a guide and accompanier upon plant medicine journeys, and happy to be a musical medicine performer with you this evening.
Thank you, beloved. Thank you all for being here. I am Reverend Mariela. I am a minister, I am a healer, a creator, and I'm just love to see you all here this afternoon, evening, whatever.
Whatever. It's
Yeah.
there's no windows here. It could be any.
It's still COVID time. It's all like.
Yeah. So I've got a song to share with you tonight that is based on some words that actually a colleague of ours wrote, and I think it really connects with my experience of plant medicine and the journeys that I've had with it and how it's changed some of my life. And I hope it will speak to you as well. There is a love holding you. There is a love holding all that you love. There is a love holding all. You rest in this love. There is a love holding me. There is a love holding all that I love. There is a love holding all. I rest in this love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love. I rest in this love. You rest in this love.
So Matthew and I were asked to do a moment of grounding. And I know exactly what that means, but I was like, what does that really mean? And so what it means is like our lives out there, you know, we came here, traffic, rush hour, parking. And then there's this weird topic we're talking about where like, who's gonna be there? Are they gonna see me? What are they gonna say? So there's a lot of cortisol rushing through us, right? And then, so we pause so that our nervous system calms down. We pause so that our hearts open. Because when our cortisol is rushing and when our heart is closed, we can't fully receive the information, right? So we open our hearts so that we can be fully present here. And so I'm asking you to take 3 breaths with me, right? So the first breath we take and we let the cortisol settle. The second breath we take, we soften our body, we come into our body, we're like, we're here, we're here, we're here, we're here. We take a third breath and we open our hearts. We open our hearts. And so from that place of being here, calm, present, open, we pause and we give thanks for this ability to gather. We give thanks for having like-minded people in one room together. We pause to take the posture of reverence, the posture of grace, because life is sacred. Death is sacred. These plant medicines, these ancient plant medicines that we're talking about tonight are sacred. And so taking a posture of reverence, a posture of grace means, like metaphorically, we take our shoes off. We know that we are now on sacred ground. And so with that posture of reverence and grace, we move forward into tonight's main event. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chad Beyer, and I invited the entire board to be on stage, both because I want to thank them and also because I don't want to be on the stage all by myself. So thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Chad Beyer. I'm the Executive Director of Decriminalize Nature Grand Rapids. I need to share some thanks, then I would like to share a brief personal story about why I am fighting for the decriminalization of plant and fungi medicines. First, I want to share love for many who have taken this journey with me. Thank you to our political advisors, Larry Norris and Carlos Plazola, with Decriminalize Nature National in Oakland. Thank you to Commissioner Rapart, our local political advisor. Thank you to Megan Jovanovic, our legal advisor, and Leslie Wyman, the chair of the West Michigan Cannabis Guild and our science advisor. Our working board is comprised of me, Mary Reed Kelly, Andrea Hendrick, and Luke Johnson. We do the day-to-day work. Many volunteers have contributed, and I cannot name them all. Finally, thank you to our sponsors, Decriminalize Nature Michigan and the Pyramid Scheme. Your contribution has made all the difference. Before I start, I have two clarifications. First, we are seeking decriminalization, not legalization. This means that plant medicine will still be illegal, similar to cannabis still being illegal at the federal level, but currently available to the Grand Rapids community. This means that while plant and fungi medicine will still be illegal at the state and federal level, the city of Grand Rapids will deprioritize plants and fungi and will not use any resources to arrest or prosecute people for possession, sharing, or use of these sacred medicines. We call this model Grow, Gather, Gift. Second, I want to define a word we use a lot in our campaign. That word is entheogen, which basically means inspiring one's own inner divinity. Entheogens are natural plants and fungi that help us to experience greater consciousness and connection. Entheogens treat many mental health and issues from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder to end-of-life anxiety and suffering. This is how I became an activist for the decriminalization of entheogens. I was diagnosed with a neurological disease 5 years ago. The doctor said it would progress and there was no cure. A few years later, I read an article about entheogenic plants and fungi and the way they help users experience love more deeply. I said to myself, I want that. I discovered a therapist who uses plant medicines in their therapy. I had 2 sessions, and I cannot say enough about how my life has changed. I feel self-acceptance and gratitude beyond anything I had ever imagined. I am no longer afraid of dying, but instead am grateful for every day. I want more people to have access to this kind of love, self-acceptance, and gratitude. I believe the Decriminalize Nature movement is a good step in that direction. Thank you, everyone, for taking the risk to be here tonight. You are standing for healing in our community. I should introduce our new speaker, our next speaker. Michael Dewilde is Professor of Management and Philosophy and Director of the COSI Business Ethics Initiative at the Seidman College of Business at Grand Valley State University.
Will you be able to hear me without a microphone? Doesn't matter what you want. I'm going to use it anyway. Here we go. The last time I was on a stage like this, it was an open mic night at Billy's, and I was behind a drum set, so it's a little disorienting, frankly. I've known Dr. John Mulder for over a decade at this point. We started working on a project to advance awareness in the community about advanced directives and living wills, that sort of thing, many years ago, and have remained friends. And we were talking backstage, as it were, and said, well, let's do this a little bit more informally. I'll go out, and I really just have two very pleasant tasks tonight. One is to do a brief literature review. Doctors have their medical kits, professors have their books. We never leave home without them. We will be recommending several before the evening is over. And the other one is to introduce Dr. John Mulder to you. So it's only about 12 pages. Hang in there, it won't take long. But he really is a formidable guy, and I want to give him his due. He currently serves as the medical director for the Trillium Institute. He's the chief medical consultant for hospice and palliative care for Holland Home, the medical director of palliative services for Metro Health in Grand Rapids. He has an appointment as an assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine at Michigan State University, the College of Human Medicine. He's also the director of the Division of Palliative Medicine and is currently the director of the Mercy Health Grand Rapids Hospice and Palliative Medicine. It's going to go on. I'm thinking, I've got 2 titles and I can't keep track of them. He's got like 20 here. So he's board certified in family medicine, more hospice and palliative care credentials. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, a frequent speaker on end-of-life ethics and palliative issues, and I know that to be a fact because I oftentimes invite him in to speak to many of my classes, including the executive MBA that Spectrum ran. Board of Directors for the Michigan Home Care Association of Michigan, chairs the ethics committees at Spectrum Health and Metro Health, previously served on the Michigan Advisory Committee on Pain and Symptom Management, and has testified in front of the U.S. House of Representatives on deliberations related to the opioid crisis.
The beauty of this is that the longer you do that, then I don't have to speak much then here. So
Yeah, how you can stay humble during any of this is amazing. We're halfway done, hang in there. John's scope of service has extended internationally. He's traveled extensively to limited access in third world countries, developing countries, to participate in medical relief, development activities. If that weren't enough, he's also a talented musician. He's a singer, songwriter, guitarist. All right, one last thing. I would be remiss not to say it, however it might discomfort him. He is, despite his many accomplishments, a humble person. But in the wisdom tradition that I'm closest to, there is a being known as a bodhisattva, a human who's generated the kind of what they call bodhicitta, the mind that strives towards wisdom, seeing the world as it truly is, has developed empathy and compassion for the benefit of all sentient beings, and one who vows then to alleviate as wisely as possible the suffering that he or she encounters. I see and have seen on a regular basis Dr. Mulder live up to that ideal in his practice, with his patients, in his talks, his teaching, in his music, and all daily interactions. So not just his patients, but all of us here in the area, I think, are truly fortunate to have him working for, with, and among us. So, Dr. John Mulder.
how do you spell that B thing?
Your wife wants to know.
Put that word on my resume. So. I'm delighted to be here. As Mike alluded to, I'm a palliative physician. My job is really quite simple, and it's quite rewarding. My job is to help to relieve suffering and to improve the quality of life for people that have life-defining illnesses. And it's not hospice, although I work in hospice, but the people that I have dealt with clinically for the better part of my 37 years of medical practice are people that are suffering. And my job is to really look for opportunities to really help them on their journey. In many circumstances, it's a short journey. And so what is it that I can do to help bring meaning and purpose and joy into their lives in the short times that they have left on this earth? And I would say that over the years, we've developed a pretty good toolkit. So I sometimes tell my patients I have a really, really deep bag of tricks. And no one's taken me to the bottom of that bag yet. And so it was probably natural that I would become interested in the entheogens because although they have their history in many spiritually related traditions, and I know that for a lot of folks, most of you, as I'm just kind of glancing around here, don't remember the 60s like I remember the 60s, okay? And a lot of these substances then became popularized on kind of experimental recreational purposes, perhaps without realizing that most of the agents that we're talking about have hundreds or thousands of years worth of experience in a very sacred way and in a very sacred means, and that they bring revelation and healing and inspiration and insightfulness to the people that have had the opportunity to use them. And so the question is a very simple question. How can these things be used in the context of medical practice and medical care to help to relieve the suffering of those that have need? Chad, I think, thank you for that testimonial, Chad. That was really, I think, wonderful and inspiring, and I think it's a good example of the ways in which these agents can be of value. And I think on the medical side, I tend to be a pragmatist, and I hold a medical license, and so I do have to follow some laws. And so that, we want to make sure that what we're doing and how we're doing this is a way that brings healing and allows me to keep my medical license. So, but we do know that these substances really provide exactly what it is that I provide for my patients, and that is to relieve suffering and to enhance quality of life. So I think that one of the things that really becomes of great interest, I prescribe a lot of medications to relieve suffering. I mean, you kind of think about the morphines and the methadones and the fentanyls and all the pain medications that we have that are available, all the anxiolytic medications and antidepressants, and probably my first foray into thinking about they're commonly used as a psychedelic. We call the psychedelics. I don't necessarily like that term because it has such a weight on its shoulders from the 60s that makes everyone kind of shudder at the thought of legalizing psychedelics. But entheogens, we can do that. But one of the drugs that already is legal is ketamine. And I've had great success in using ketamine as an opportunity for helping people that have intractable depression and things of that sort. And finding something like that brings meaningfulness and restores health, physical and emotional, I think is very powerful stuff. So these substances can be used in helping people navigate the end of life and to really allow them to really achieve better life-determined self-closure goals. And I'm going to kind of defer to my learned academician here because you've got some background in terms of the literature to understand exactly some of the specifics on what the substances are and how they're used. That's what we need. We don't need everything right now. We just need. We've got to be out of here by 6:45. So.
I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do play one in class sometimes.
Yes.
And I am fascinated. Part of my own interest in this does come from ethics. So on one hand, the large sort of public policy question of ethics, for whom are these drugs illicit, and sort of comparing and contrasting who gets prosecuted for the use of them and who doesn't, where they're widely available and where they aren't. Michael Pollan, who's probably a familiar name to most of you. I brought both How to Change Your Mind as well as his most recent book, which is just out, This Is Your Mind on Plants. And in here, he refers to the difference between Purdue Pharma and the billions of dollars the Sackler family made compared to the hundreds of thousands of especially black men who are in prison. I spent 14 years at the Muskegon Correctional Facility. They asked me to come in to teach. I wasn't. That was.
Thanks for that clarification.
But there are probably any number of reasons that I should have been there with the guys. But one of the things that interests me is that sort of large political policy question. The other one is much more personal in terms of spiritual and experiences and consciousness raising, altered consciousness, that sort of thing, and end of life, as John mentions. And in this book, if you're not familiar with it, How to Change Your Mind, I can't recommend it highly enough. Pollan's not only a brilliant writer, but he's a bit of a psychonaut, or became one in the process of writing the book. And he takes you through his own experiences with psilocybin and acid and ayahuasca. And then he's got a section on neuroscience in which he pulls back and tries to, in about 20, 25 pages, tell you what's actually happened to not only his brain, but your brain, my brain, as we've taken these various substances. So rather than try to, if you have a specific question about that, I can paraphrase some of what he said. But let me, as highly, again, as possible, recommend How to Change Your Mind. One of the, I'll just say maybe this briefly if I can, and one of the things that's interested me for a long time, before I became a respectable member of society and started teaching at the business school, I was a wayward graduate student. My interest was actually comparative religious traditions and philosophy, which will get you far in life, I can tell you. But actually, I'm joking, but I think it can. And I was very fortunate to be at an institution where there was a long tradition of experiential learning as well as academic study and learning. In fact, in the 1960s, this particular institution had a course on the books in which part of the course fees were went to buying acid, LSD. And so when my students these days say, well, we're so much more progressive than you guys, it's like, well, yeah, really? You have a course on the book where you drop acid, is that right? I'm pretty sure you don't. Like John, I would also like to keep my job. But one of the central miracles of the history of human evolution is the development of the individual self, the individual ego self. It's also one of the central problems, right? Almost all spiritual traditions take that up and say that centralized, individuated ego is part of what provokes so much anxiety, dread, pain, anger, greed, etc. in us. And the people that I was surrounded with, the very smart people, open to experience, adventurous folks, watching me stumble through various forms of meditation, tantra, etc., said, hey, we've got something else if you want to try it. And so 35 years ago was my first experience with psilocybin, and it was remarkable. In fact, when I got back to reading Pollan, when his 2015 New Yorker piece came out about using psilocybin in trials at Johns Hopkins and NYU, et cetera, one of the remarkable things about it was how consistent people's reporting those experiences were with my own, how transcendent they were, how life-changing, transformative they were. And ways in which, whether it's the default mode network in the brain, the colostrum, parts of the deep brain that are still being explored by fMRI imaging at these various places that are doing the work, it does, it does seem, to diminish that kind of executive function where the control that we normally have to think of ourselves as I, me, my, dissipates, and there's an awful lot in the literature, including people's testimonials, that goes to the notion of ego dissolution. Now, sometimes that's a great thing, and you come out, on the other side of that thinking, well, great, I've seen a new side of what life can be. Other people are less prepared for it. We can talk about set and setting maybe a little bit later, are unnerved by it, but it's always highly instructive. And I wonder, John, to take it back to you, if as hospice has gained more popularity, since Gowande and others. Are you being asked by more and more patients for this kind of medicine?
I think that there's two things. The short answer would be yes. People are now requesting it as they hear about it. I think that the broader question is people are really. I think that as a society, we are becoming more self-reflective and somewhat introspective, and some of that's driven by an awful lot of different things. But people are becoming progressively concerned. What have I left undone? What am I not getting about this world? And and some people may not necessarily describe that as suffering, but others are very, very troubled. I remember, and this goes back 35 years, one of my physician colleagues was in my office and just really had not had a spiritual tradition of any sort. By that, I don't mean he hasn't had a religious experience, because there are a lot of people that are very spiritual, but not religious. But he had really not tapped into the spiritual side of his being. He'd been a type A, just driven, and studying, and never really focused much on the meaning of life. And now his dad was terminally ill, and he looked at me and he said, I don't get it. You live and you die and that's it? And I said, how much time do you got? Clearly my initial role is just to put my arm around his shoulder and to love him in a very, very difficult time for him, and hope that we could develop the relationship over time that really would allow him to see that truly in our inner selves there's much meaning. Now, one thing I want to be careful about talking about is that you don't need these substances to experience inner peace, revelation, spiritual wholeness, all these things that people discover. And I would argue, and this is not just my own opinion, but I've had ongoing conversations with a colleague of mine that works with a large prominent university in the Boston area. And he's been involved in psilocybin studies. And his assessment after working with many of these patients and being the navigator for many of these folks, observing what the experience is before, during, and after, that it's a powerful tool that we must have access to. But he also says probably most people in life don't need it, but some do. And it's just like, and there's so many parallels within medicine. I've got people that die very, very comfortably that don't need the powerful opioids that we sometimes have to use because of intractable pain at the end of life. But some do. And I'm grateful we have those resources available to us. And I will be grateful when we have these resources available to us also. Some of the observations that he has, and he just, actually I had what I kind of referred to as my tune-up call for today with him last night. And he's just finishing up one study in which they had 10 people in this particular cohort. They did the study, they finished the study, and virtually everybody in the study wants to continue because of the powerful change that it's made in their life. This sense of, as Michael described, less of ourselves, and it's sometimes described as the transcendence. When we realize that there's much more to this world than just me, and I'm a part of this, and other people are a part of this, and we are, we have this really wonderful connectedness that sometimes we blot out, and that just puts a damper on life and our experiences that really can't be defined. The group of folks that my colleague and friend was working with all had major depression and advanced cancer. Now we could spend another half hour talking about which came first, because I've seen certainly a lot of people who develop their major depression in response to their disease state. I've also seen a lot of people who we wonder if the extent of their mental illness is what produces their physiologic disruption. And there's a lot of interesting data on that out in the literature. But to a person, he said they all found meaningfulness. They found their, as he described it, as they describe it, their authentic selves. And what a powerful motivation that is for healing. So, you know, I'm an advocate of this because of the potential for helping people that are suffering. I mean, that's what I do.
Can you say a word, John, about where you see your colleagues in this? Are you out in front on this? Is there now a growing movement in terms of palliative care? Where are we?
So, I think you read that one already. So.
I have nothing left to say. There it goes.
The forces that be are saying to move on.
Everything happens just as it must.
Yes. So I've noticed for the last 4 or 5 years when I go to our national conferences, there is now always a session on entheogens. A lot of them, they still call them psychedelics because they want to draw in the crowd. You know. And everyone is really developing this coalescence around the concept that this is good stuff. This is potentially very valuable for us. But right now, it's not really reachable. We have really the only way you can get into that here in the United States legally is through clinical trials. That's the only option that's available legally. There are certainly underground options, and those exist, quite frankly, in most communities, in which there are folks that there are therapists that are engaged, and there are folks, sometimes doctors, who are engaged in these practices, and service facilitators and guides. And so what happens is that in many areas of the world, these are legal and expected and natural sorts of resources available. And so there are a lot of people that travel for them. And the colleague that I talked to, he himself has traveled for them because he really feels that they're that powerful. The legal remedies that we have that would be in a similar category are ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which you can get here. You see ketamine clinics that are popping up a lot here, and cannabis-assisted psychotherapy. And the key is that these are not just drugs that are handed out and people go home and take them and use them, but they are done with the guidance of someone who is expert in understanding what they can do and how to guide the individual through that experience, whether it be the assisted psychotherapy. You see ketamine clinics popping up in most major cities in the United States now. I, for one, have been very, very liberal at prescribing ketamine over the years because of the value that I found both in terms of pain relief as well as for relief of depression. And I've had some interesting subsidiary effects as well that have really endeared me to the medication. If people have questions, I can kind of give more specific examples of what I have viewed over the years. The substances that we're talking about, psilocybin is probably the headliner. That's the one that we have a lot of experience with. There are well-identified protocols in terms of what you take, how much you take, what types of assistance is needed at the at the side of the bed in walking people through these experiences. And it comes from mushrooms. There's actually over 200 different mushrooms that have been identified that have some element of psilocybin in them. Another one is the ibogaine, which comes from the ioba tree. Very similar, this is more like a dreamlike nature, more of a, more like an LSD-ish kind of a thing where people, it's not so much that they get as much insight as they might get with the psilocybin, but they really have a different view of the world as a result of that. Mescaline is another one that is commonly thought of. It's from peyote. So we have a lot of history here in the United States with the Native Americans and their use in introducing us to that particular thing. The one thing about mescaline that's different than the others is that it actually can be synthesized in the lab. And the other one is, I think, Mike, you'd mentioned ayahuasca. I always have a hard time saying that, but ayahuasca. How do you say it? Ayahuasca. Ayahuasca. Yeah. And that's actually a brew from a bark of a tree that's been used for, gosh, at least 1,000 years. And that, again, as with many of these, their historical use is in ceremonies. And most of these ceremonial uses are connected with some sort of a spiritual experience. You actually have congregations and you have temples and you have these congregational and societal connections around that allow someone to really experience in an entirely different dimension of connectedness by the availability of these substances and the availability of these substances in community. So it really kind of changes the nature of how people exist and how they interact with one another.
It's interesting. So this book was mentioned earlier. This picks up on the point John just made. Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear. Dr. Hart, who's in psychology and psychiatry at Columbia University, well-regarded, well-published, interesting guy. And Pollan picks up on this point about he uses the Greek word pharmakon to talk about medicine as both poison and its healing properties, depending upon the context and the culture. And in both books, both authors spend some time saying, for example, in This Is Your Mind on Plants, Pollan is looking at opium, caffeine, and mescaline. And he says, well, caffeine is interesting, isn't it? He said, you could probably make a case that the European Enlightenment itself is a product of the introduction of coffee. That people learned to stay awake long enough to think rationally, logically, and linearly, right? And he goes so far as to say in the book that, gee, isn't that a great thing for capitalism? While an awful lot of cultures, indigenous and otherwise, are sitting around with ingesting very different kinds of plant-based medicine, and maybe not chasing something like an almighty dollar. He said, caffeine works awfully well for our particular kind of capitalism, right? How do I need to get through the 3 o'clock thing? You know, and he implicates himself in that as well. He says, you know, I did an experiment. I'm talking about, I mean, in his voice, Pollan says, I'm going to see if I can finish this chapter without caffeine. I don't want to spoil it for you, but guess what? And so he talks about it. He said, look, that's illegal everywhere in the world. People have different cultural uses for it. If you're in Vienna, it's a different kind of ritual than it is at Starbucks, you know, et cetera. But then you compare and contrast that with some of the illicit substances, or at least the ones we consider illicit, and what they might do in terms of perhaps slowing us down, giving us a whole different perspective. What if, I guess I want to ask this as a question, have any of your patients come back and said, gee, I wish I had done this in my 30s, 40s, 50s. I would have, you know, whether it's ketamine or whether they're doing something under the table, maybe that would have altered how I spent my life or how I saw my life?
You know, it's interesting because one of the things that I've not seen is regret. So you know, what happens is people enter this realm and they're kind of immersed in the revelation and the peacefulness of what it is. But they don't come back and then suddenly put their old hat back on and saying, well, Merry Christmas, I wish I'd, you know. And it sort of reminds me of, you know, folks that who, you know, practice, you know, religion within the Christian tradition. You know, one of the beliefs there is you get to heaven and everything is great. You don't have to look back, okay? Because that's in the past. That's all gone. That's the, you know, and everything that happened to you then leads up to where you are now. And it's so, one of the things that I found from some folks is that it's not that they have regrets, it's just that they're delighted to see who they have been and what they have done and where they are has brought them to this point of enlightenment at this particular point in time. So it's really to me quite fascinating. I was you know, in looking at through some of the literature on these substances, one of them, the ayahuasca, was I read this line that said it had been used societally connect with nature and with family and friends who are distant. And it reminded me of a young man that I had treated, golly, probably 7-8 years ago. And initially I was treating him for pain. He had had an automobile accident and had facial injuries from an airbag deployment and had this severe pain. And he had had all sorts of interventions and injections and drilling holes and trying to find nerves and deaden the nerves, and pain never went away. So he ended up in my clinic, and I said, I'd like to try some ketamine with you. Went through a couple of titrations, and he came back into the office once, and he said to me, I said, how's the pain? He says, the pain's gone. This is great. I said, wonderful. Any problems with it at all? Any side effects or challenges with it? No. He says, although I was talking to my dad the other day, and I said, and my dad's been dead for years. Okay. And I said, oh, tell me about that. And he's relating the conversations, not one-sided, two-sided conversations he's having with his father. And I said, I'm happy to change the dose of that so we can see if we can, kind of tweak this to maintain the pain, but to eliminate that experience. And I'm very, very specific. I'm not calling them hallucinations. I'm not calling them apparitions. They're experiences. Okay? They're just as real as if he was there in person. And I said, I'm happy to adjust the dose. And he said, no, not yet. This is meaningful time. And that to me was just a powerful, reminder of what can be unlocked in that. Another one I had asked him to see, he hadn't been a patient of mine, and his wife had seen some of the work that we were doing and said, would you see my husband? He has pain all over his body. 15 years ago, he had an automobile accident, and he was not expected to survive. And when he survived, he was not expected to come off the ventilator or ever wake up. When he did wake up, and when he did come off the ventilator, he was never expected to walk again. Months later of rehab, he's walking and talking, and he's back with us. But he has this pain. It's like pins and needles over his entire body that he's had for 15 years, and nobody can seem to do anything about it. So once again, I went to one of my tried and trues with some ketamine, because I think it's I'm a little more focused, especially way back when I was using it primarily for pain issues. And, so I gave him some medication. I came back to see him a couple weeks later, and he greeted me at the door. He was all excited. He was looking at his wife, was sitting on the couch looking exhausted. And I was this kind of a strange picture. And he said, I said, how about the pain? Pain's gone. It's really great. And I said, well, good. And then his wife filled in the rest of the story. He had been amnesic since the accident. And so not only did he have to learn to walk and to talk and to function in life again, but he had no memory of any of his life from from before the accident. So he was living with this woman who he had learned to love over the last 15 years, and these children who he was told were his children, and sometimes he wanted to believe it, sometimes not, but so this was the life he'd created. As soon as he got the ketamine, it's like the shade went up, and all of his life returned. Okay, and his wife said, and he hasn't stopped talking about it. Well, of course not. And she said, his chronology isn't quite right, but, and again, to me, it was just, there was wonderment in that for me, in terms of how the medication impacts what's going on in the brain, and how tightly the brain and our psyche and our psychology are all so tightly interrelated. So there's good stuff in there.
Anyway, so Pollen wrestles with this all the way through How to Change Your Mind, if you recall. And that is that question of, so is it real or not, right? So I'm doing all these various drugs, and I've got guides, and I'm having all these experiences. Can I trust it? Or is it just, quote unquote, just the brain? Various neurons and synapses firing in different ways, and it's all material, and it can all be discounted in one way or another through, neurobiology. And he wrestles with that throughout the book, and how do I make it? What do I make of this? How do I talk about it? He finally gets near the end, and he goes, guess what? He says to the reader, so what? I don't care. And he kind of takes, whether you're maybe a little on the Eastern side, a more Buddhist interpretation of it, or on the Western side, maybe a little bit more of a William Jamesian notion, where he says, okay, what's the practical effect in my life of these experiences and interpreting these experiences with the help of a guide over time. Have I seen any lasting changes that, in fact, my life is better, there's less anxiety, there's less dread, I'm more present to others, I feel more compassionate, I'm more present, et cetera, et cetera. And his answer to that is a resounding yes, even though as articulate as he is, it's how he makes his living, he has a very hard time describing it. There's one lovely passage near the end of the book after one of his experiences where he says, I finally understand why people coming out of some of these experiences just say, wow. He said, because I want to tell you about this experience, but all I can think of is, wow. And another part where he says, I'm sorry. He said, I know I'm going to sound like a Hallmark card, but I did. I had one of those sort of classic, almost cliched psilocybin experiences where I went out to the edge of the universe and I touched the face of God and I saw how reality is constructed. Everything is okay. There's nothing to worry about, and everything is love. And then he's got a little comment because he's an intellectual and a writer and a bit of a cynic. He says, I'm so sorry I wrote that last line. He said, but it's true. On the other hand, and this is where Timothy Leary comes back into play and is still relevant, he's the one who talked about the importance of set and setting. And I don't know if you want to speak about that in your work as well, but very briefly, what Leary meant by that is if you're going to do any of these kinds of entheogens, you better have a sense of intent. Where is your mind? What is it you want to get out of this? What mindset are you bringing to this, et cetera? And what's your setting? Are you surrounded by an object you love? Are you comfortable? Are you distracted, et cetera? One of the most famous pieces from the book is, are there mirrors around? And if there are, you better cover them up because you don't want to see yourself at that point. So the set and setting become a critically important part of how you do this, and he doesn't shy away from saying he's also had experiences, this rings true in my experience as well, where the first one was like, the gates of whatever, Tushita Hevet, or your own particular tradition, open, near my God to thee. It's like, finally I can relax and just live. The second experience is like, oh shit, that was pretty dark and scary. And so in Pollan's work, and a lot of people write on this, the importance of a guide cannot be overstated. It's funny, Hart takes that up in Drug Use for Grownups. It's about maybe a quarter way through the book, and the line struck me. He said, all these people want guide, blah, blah, blah. He said, that just seems really creepy to me. So to each his own. And one more thing about Hart before I ask, to turn it over to here. He also has probably injected a greater sense of maybe social equity and justice into his work than some others. So one of the things, Hart at various points in the book takes people probably like me to task. He says, well, sure, hey, you're not going to get in trouble for it. And, you've got this superior class of entheogens. He goes on to defend things like heroin and PCP, and he's got a whole argument for why that's really actually okay, done responsibly, and in all the ways that he talks about. I'm certainly not advocating any of that, don't get me wrong, either as a private citizen or anything else. But I do recommend the book to you because he knows he's going out on a limb there. He wants to push the discussion a little bit farther even than Pollan has pushed it.
So there's some, I think, really valuable parallels here when we start talking about how do we view and use and advocate for entheogens versus what happens in the traditional medical system. You mentioned heroin, and heroin is diacetylmorphine. That's what it is. It is a morphine molecule that has a couple of other little doodads on it. If you're a chemist, you know what I'm talking about. And those two little doodads allow it to transcend the blood-brain barrier. It gets into the brain quicker, so it produces a greater euphoria than does regular morphine. But they're essentially the same drug, okay? They can be used for the same purpose. Heroin is part of what's called Brompton's cocktail, which is what they use in end-of-life care over in Europe, especially in England. So it's legal over there. And say, well, of course, because it's used in the hands of physicians who understand how to use it, how to prescribe it, how to monitor it, and how to manage the patient. And just as I wouldn't throw a bunch of morphine out on the sidewalk, And whoever wants to get it can get it to use for whatever they want to, whenever they want to, however they want to, as much as they want. You wouldn't do that because that would be irresponsible and inappropriate. And I think that we need to approach the entheogens with the same level of respect and conservatism. These are medications. They're plant-based medications, but I've got a whole anthology of plant-based medications that I write a prescription for. So the fact that they're plants is, it speaks of the naturalness of it, but it does not necessarily give a free pass to say you can use it indiscriminately. People will get hurt. People have side effects from these things, and people have adverse reactions to them. Mescaline in particular gives people bad trips, and you can't ever predict who's going to have a bad trip or not. So you need to have the guide. You need to have someone who understands this, who knows how to dose it, who knows how to monitor you, or the patient or whoever this is going to be, so that, and I think that there needs to be a very explicit expectation and understanding on the front end. If someone comes in and said, hey, I'd like some morphine, I said, why? Okay, because I heard it makes you feel good. I said, okay, what's going on that you need to feel good about, and then to be able to make a really important discrimination as far as, is whatever's going on that you would like to see changed in your life, see improved, going to be helped by morphine, or is there something else that I can give you? It's like, people talk about, Michael you commented that I've had the opportunity to testify in front of Congress on opioid issues, which is a really interesting experience. If you think that your political system is screwed up from what you read in the paper, go to Washington sometime. It was I shouldn't demean it. It was a fascinating experience for me. I'm glad I had the opportunity to do that. And part of the question, are the doctors really at fault here? I have people coming into the office and said, can you refill my Norco? And I will say to them, first of all, let's talk about why you're taking it in the first place. And second of all, are you interested in getting rid of your pain, or are you just want me to write the prescription Norco? Because that will tell me what direction we're going to go and how I can help them. If they say, I just want the Norco, and I say, I'm, quite frankly, not your guy. I'm more interested in helping you get rid of your pain. So as regarding as regards the entheogens, what is the issue that you are trying to address in your life? And it might be that I'm stuck, I'm depressed, I need a different level of motivation, my relationships suck, or whatever it is that's going on. And then that's, those are legitimate reasons to consider using something that might be able to help with your healing process. But just as we would not indiscriminately prescribe something else indiscriminately, nor should you do that with these substances. They need to be done by trained practitioners who understand how to dose it, what they're doing, and can guide you through that process.
I think we're at time. Is that what you're telling me?
So we have an opportunity here to open ourselves up to questions that you might have. We don't know if we've clarified everything in the world that you might want to know about this subject. I'm not even sure that we can answer the questions you might ask, but we're going to make ourselves vulnerable and pretend that we do. So let's just, I don't know if you can, are there lights? We do have the disco ball there. That might provide some light there. But just so I can see people, and we've got a roving mic here. Yes, we have a roving mic.
You can either ask questions or just dance, I guess.
So what if you have thoughts, curiosities, observations, questions, concerns,
Okay,
frustrations?
And we just wanted to say, feel free to stretch a little bit if you'd like, but we're going to start with
we
questions.
We got one right down here in front here. Oh, we're going back there. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. That was great. I'm curious about the ketamine prescription for pain management.
Yes.
Is that single dose that you see that kind of response?
So that's a great question. For pain management, no. It's an ongoing prescription that you take anywhere from 1 to 3, 4 times a day. A lot of the work that's been done for depression is single dose. And so what happens is when I'm treating people for pain, a lot of times they feel better. You know, it's had an impact on their psychological well-being as well, and they may have had some aspect of depression, melancholy, anxiety they didn't realize until we start that. Since you mentioned the ketamine, I want to make one other comment because you were talking about the social justice issues that Hart brings up, and this to me is a really, really difficult area because something like ketamine, it has to be compounded. So I go to a couple different local pharmacists who will compound it for me and then provide it for the patients. Because it's a compounded substance, insurance doesn't cover it. And by the way, insurance is not going to cover your entheogens in either, not today anyway. And so, you know, he's very benevolent. He kind of keeps the cost low, but it still might cost 75, 80, maybe $100 a month, which you'd say, that's not too bad. I've got a $30 copay on some of my drugs, and some it doesn't cover. But for people on low income, fixed income, they don't have 75, 80 bucks a month to pay. So guess who gets treated with the ketamine? Those that have resources. Who are the ones that really need it for their chronic pain management or their mental health disease? Are the people that don't have the resources. So that's just a soapbox issue. It's not your question, but it made me think about it. So, okay. I had a question down here in front here.
Yeah, I wondered if Michigan has a right to try statute in there. Oh, I'm talking loud enough for everybody can hear, but
he doesn't need a mic. So.
The right to try issue here in the state where FDA drugs can be used at end of life. The reason I bring it up is Ames Institute in Washington has made an issue of it and brought it up with the DEA. And there's a case moving forward, or I don't know if it's a case, but oral arguments will be made on Tuesday next week. But you should be able to prescribe a right to try, or prescribe drugs under this right to try rule if you have that in Michigan.
So the issue with right to try doesn't have to do with medications that are already available. I can do that. Any drug that has been approved by the FDA, I can write for any person for any reason, okay? Now, we in medicine call it off-label use. And so my charting ought to be pretty damn clear as to why I'm using this drug as an off-label use. And there certainly is a lot of latitude in end of life because we're more concerned about the relief of suffering than we are theoretical side effects. So I can do that. The right to try has to do with those medications that are currently in trial, not yet approved by the FDA, but they show promise. And so when you've got a pediatric child with intractable seizures, you're going to die because you can't break the seizures, and you've got a drug that's in trial, and the parents are saying, we don't care that the FDA hasn't approved it. We don't care. We just want some of that because nothing else that's available has helped my son. Can you please provide that? And so that's what the right to try legislation is. Michigan does not have that legislation in place yet. So there have been efforts to do that, and there are strong arguments for and against that legislation. But I have successfully gotten trial drugs for patients under compassionate use circumstances, and that FDA does allow that. So.
I too am grateful for your discussion tonight. So thank you both so much. So I made the mistake a few weeks ago of trying to share my passion for psychedelics with my parents.
Uh-oh.
And I say that because they literally couldn't handle the word psychedelics, as you were mentioning.
They must be about my age.
Even older, I think. But not as wise, clearly. Anyway, I'm also sitting here listening to you tonight, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my dad's back pain. I just know ketamine could be a really good option for him. So I'm wondering if you have, what do you see as a direction to get this as a mainstream acceptable path? Both, I don't know, that's my question right there.
Yeah, so what I've seen is that our pain clinics, both nationally and even here in Grand Rapids, are progressively using ketamine, whereas 10 years ago they were not. And so, if the pain clinics very often now will give trials of ketamine. They will oftentimes, I use, again, I use oral forms of it, but the pain clinics almost always will use an IV form of it. They will They use it very similar to how the ketamine for depression clinics work. They'll have someone come in, they'll have them sit there for a while, give them an infusion, watch them for a couple of hours, and see how they respond to that. Because it does work so quickly. And so I guess my short answer would be he should, if he doesn't have a relationship with one of the pain clinics here in Grand Rapids, he might want to check on that and specifically request if, what would you think about ketamine? So yes, that's the short answer. It's becoming more available. Do I want to put a plug in for my clinic? Well, so yeah, it's a complicated answer, quite frankly, because I had to kind of step away from clinical practice about 4 years ago. I didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't that, I had a lung transplant, and as a result of the lung transplant, I am immunocompromised, which means that I'm susceptible to disease. A simple cold could put me in the hospital, for example. So the team said, don't go back treating patients. So I don't personally see patients anymore. I do a lot of consulting on the side. My phone is pretty busy. But we do have a clinic, a palliative clinic, in which we address the suffering of people that have life-limiting illnesses. And so we don't do a lot of chronic pain management. We do a lot of cancer care. We do a lot of people with progressive neurologic disease and things of that sort. It's called Trillium Palliative Services. That's the plug. It's a division of Holland Home.
Do you find stigma, though? Sorry, I'm just wondering about if there's still stigma, and how do we get over that?
The stigma of
Psychedelics.
Well, there are still a lot of people. There's a stigma attached to marijuana, right? There are a lot of people that still have some skepticism over that. There's still a stigma over having depression. How many people, I'm sitting here telling you that I had a lung transplant. Golly, that's a big deal. That's a kind of a personal piece of information. It doesn't bother me that I don't think you're going to think different of me because I have had a lung disease that required a transplant. But people don't have that same level of willingness to talk about their mental health issues. I think part of the issues with the entheogens, and that's why I like to use that word instead of psychedelics, is because nobody knows the word, so it's pretty acceptable. And yeah, but then when you start talking about, well, one of the main uses is for mental illness and for advanced depression are some of the clinical reasons we would use that. That tends to marginalize people. And people talking about, our gymnast who is, withdrew from competition because she needed to address her mental health. And people are saying, how brave of her. And other people, I guarantee, are saying, what the hell are you talking about? Get up on the beam and do your thing, So.
Can I just one quick add on to that, just really quickly? So I can't afford to buy everybody a copy of this book, but I've made my contribution to Pollen's retirement, no doubt. Maybe 30 or so copies handed out to everybody that has asked her. And uniformly, without exception, people have been highly skeptical. People maybe not unlike your father, who actually have read the book, have come back and said, "Oh my God, thank you. That completely changed." I think he's done just a huge service, to the world, frankly, in this book. So it's changed so many people's minds.
So I've seen, just a second, I see. I have seen, I've been around long enough to see changes in attitudes on something as simple as morphine, where people refuse to take morphine because they thought it was just evil stuff, to accepting that and using that in positive ways. And even marijuana these days, some people still have a bias in it, but certainly not what they did back 25, 30 years ago. And so I think that we're going to see a similar evolution as people saying, well, what were we afraid of? What were we concerned about? And when we get enough decades past the 60s, that people won't remember that. Some don't already remember that. But, yeah. Yes?
So my question is about ketamine, and you mentioned prescribing it to people that are suffering from depression and pain. I've heard or I've read or about psilocybin and people that are taking specific medication for that are on antidepressants, they should come off of them, which sounds like it's kind of like dangerous, or what if it doesn't work for them, and so they're reluctant. So does ketamine? Can you take ketamine safely while on antidepressants?
So the short answer is yes. They work in very different pathways. If I'm providing ketamine for depression, Walgreens is calling me. So if I have someone who's being treated for depression and we think that we want to try ketamine for depression, it's usually because whatever they've tried isn't working. I think that antidepressants have been a valuable part of our pharmacy stocks, but I will tell you that I don't see earth-shattering changes from them. Okay? People who have, when they come to me and we're talking about that, and I'm saying, so how's the drug helped? I guess it helped some, or I don't know that I really can tell the difference. I asked the spouse. Yeah, it seems like a little less edgy. I don't have, so to me, it's not a problem to first of all, if I needed to remove someone from a drug, to try something else. For example, you mentioned the psilocybin. I would not use psilocybin in the context of someone who's on other psychoactive medications. Because the reactions can be different and can be unknown. My preference would be go off of those and then try the psilocybin. Ketamine, because I know exactly how ketamine works and the pathways it works and the receptors that it hits, I don't have any concern that somehow that's going to disrupt the use of the antidepressants. What I do find is that if it helps with the depression, we get them off the antidepressants pretty quickly thereafter.
Just want to add on to that. In the book, Pollan, all the researchers that he quotes, he's very careful to say if you've got any sort of history of schizophrenia, psilocybin is not for you. And if you're under the age of 40, it's probably not for you. Sorry, young people. But he's got it. Hopefully that'll entice you to read the book, and you'll have a huge celebration when you're 40. So
I think we have time for just one more.
I just want to make a comment going back to the question about the stigma about your dad. Right. The way I think about it is broccoli gives me calcium, and carrots give me vitamin A. And so there are plants, such as mushroom, right, that has that calms my nervous system, that creates new neurons. There's something as neurogenesis, right? There is this to make new connections, to learn new things. Gives access to more spirituality and depth and well-being, right? And so Michael Pollan asked this is what I had to talk myself, to open myself up, because my own mind had the stigma. Michael Pollan asked this question: why in the world would a fungus go to the trouble of producing a chemical compound that has such a radical effect on the minds of the animals that eat it? Why in the world would a fungus go to the trouble of producing a chemical compound that has such a profound effect on us? So it's nature. And so the movement of decriminalize nature is like, we do not criminalize broccoli or carrots, right? And so that's how I've been able to make sense of it in a way.
Our work is done. For this moment. You're welcome.
Thank you both so much for your expertise and your humor and your compassion and your work. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for being a part of this movement, for your love, for your courage, for your time. You may be wondering, what next? We are, as far as tonight goes, we have this room for about 15 more minutes. So you can be in this space for 15 minutes to mingle, to chat, to talk with the other presenters, to visit the tables. Decriminalize Nature and Decriminalize Michigan, or Decriminalize Nature Grand Rapids and Decriminalize Nature Michigan are both have tables back there. If you see one of these little cards anywhere near you, please know you've grab these, take them with you. The QR code here takes you to the home page on Decriminalize Nature Michigan, and you can learn more about the movement, about our next steps here, about what's going on. You can also donate, because though we have generous donors of space and time, which is wonderful, thanks again to Pyramid Scheme and to the Cannabis Guild for your sponsorship, for making these spaces available. It's also going to be helpful for printing cards like this and for continuing to get word out. The hope is that the City Council will be voting on this fall or late summer sometime, and you can certainly follow movement or sign up to continue to be notified about that by checking out the webpage. I think that's about it. Oh, and if you're interested in attending or speaking at the City Commission meetings when they vote, please reach out to Decriminalize Nature Grand Rapids. I was at the City Council meeting a few weeks ago, and it was just powerful both to see 20 folks show up and about half or more who stood in front of the City Council and those in attendance to lend their support. You don't even have to write your own statement. Something could be scripted for you. But also to see where this is in the life of the city, that movements for racial justice and other movements for social justice are also tied into movements like this. And Tammy used the word resistance when we were talking earlier, that this is a space for supporting resistance in our community, as well as resilience. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being here and lending your time. Have a great night and get out by 7. Thank you.